Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching India's World with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. Well, the historic inauguration of Kamala Harris as America's Vice President has further cemented the importance of the relationship between the United States and India, according to a top White House official. Born to a Jamaican father and an Indian mother, 56-year-old Kamala Harris made history on Wednesday when she was sworn in as the first female, first black, and first Asian American US Vice President. The former senator from California was sworn in just before Joe Biden took the oath of office to become the 46th President of the United States. Addressing reporters at a daily news conference on Thursday, the White House press secretary said President Biden respects the long bipartisan successful relationship between India and the United States. The historic inauguration of Indian-origin Kamala Harris, the official said, further cements this relationship. In this edition of India's World, we will analyze India-US ties under the Biden presidency. Joining me on the program today are Yashwant Raj, US correspondent of the Hindustan Times, Jitendranath Mishra, former ambassador, and Swaran Singh, chairperson, Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, JNU. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Yashwant Raj, let me begin the program with you first. Really, what is the sense as far as the Biden administration is concerned towards India?
Thanks for having me here, Frank, and it's a pleasure to meet everyone on the panel. It's too early to see where the Biden administration will go on India, because typically what happens when a new administration comes in, the first couple of months are devoted to domestic policy, and Biden comes in at a very critical time for the U.S., which is undergoing this major epidemic, which has been the worst hit country in the world. So that's his top priority, and the economic crisis that has come with the epidemic. So he will barely find any time for foreign policy. But of course, because of his long years as a senator, he was very involved he was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. So he has long experience and involvement in foreign policy. But there are already some signs that have begun emerging during Blinken, his nominee for Secretary of State, his confirmation hearing. He spoke at length about India, and he also made the same point that Jen Psaki made on the White House press conference about how there is bipartisan support for India, and he recounted how the relationship has evolved over time, over all the previous administrations, and he also pointed to that India and the U.S. could do more on climate change together. So that is one specific point he made. And Lloyd Austin, who was confirmed yesterday for Secretary of Defense, he spoke about India's the designation of India as a major defense partner and the importance of Quad going forward. So there are good signs. And again, just so that I don't forget, President Biden started making calls to foreign leaders, and the first was Justin Trudeau yesterday, the Canadian Prime Minister. And so very soon he will probably also call Prime Minister Modi. If you remember, Prime Minister Modi was among the first world leaders, a group of world leaders he called to return the congratulatory messages. And so we expect something to happen on those lines, but the first few months will be mostly domestic and as you can tell from all the executive action orders he has issued so far.
Absolutely. All right. So, Ambassador, let me come across to you now. So what are some of the telltale signs that we need to look out for really and see which direction probably the Indo-US relationship will be going towards?
First of all, Frank, thank you very much for inviting me for the show again. Well, the direction of the relationship is positive, and there is bipartisan support, as we just heard. That's a very important point, and that's been repeated by many officials. Over the last decades, the last 4 presidents of the United States, whether Republican or Democrat, have followed the same set of policies broadly. And here, the direction of the relationship in the next 4 years will be determined by the global setting and primarily by the rise of China and the need to respond to the rise of China. And this is not stated openly for obvious reasons in diplomacy, but this is going to be something always lurking in the background. And both the countries are abundantly aware of that. So I would argue that this relationship will be determined at the strategic level. Let us start with the political and strategic level. We already have mechanisms for 2+2, which is an annual meeting alternately in both the capitals. We have the defense relationship institutionalized. We have the Quad. We have a broad spectrum of issues, every global issue, climate change, counterterrorism, cyber security, outer space, everything is being discussed. When I was in the United States, we really had nothing much to say. We had to hear the Americans when I was posted there many years ago, because India was not truly a power with global heft and global power and influence, able to influence global issues. As the External Affairs Minister has said, we want to lead. We don't want to balance anymore. So we have to take responsibilities. Now, coming to China, obviously, the Quad is very important. We don't know exactly what's happened. The Quad has it has taken some time to evolve into a regular dialogue at the ministerial level, but we are not sure. And right now, from our point of view, China is right there, up there. The trade issues are important, and I don't think they'll be resolved. The differences over the trade issues will be resolved. Human rights, I think, will be all right. There will be some noises made by the Americans on human rights in India. And President Biden, in his campaign documents, had spoken about the CAA and Kashmir. But I suspect that this will again be in the back burners because of the more pressing need to engage in a way that we can deal with the rise of China as a concert of powers together with other like-minded countries. And there will be, of course, the president and the administration will be right now concerned with domestic issues. And we also heard statements that the priority is to revive the economy, and the priority is to strengthen the country internally, and everything else will be subordinate to that. So India will not be right there up there in the radar, but as a long-term or medium-term prospect, it's going to be very, very optimistic. It's going to be a very strong relationship. It has been said very clearly from the American side and, of course, from the Indian side. The spokesman had said when President-elect Biden was elected that there is bipartisan support in the United States. So I see a very bright future.
Right. So since we are here then, Professor, let's talk about China and focus a little bit on the Indo-Pacific and what's likely to happen there. We saw under the Trump administration, President Trump had taken a very tough stand as far as China is concerned. Can we see more of that? Can we see the US, interacting and coordinating a lot more with the Quad to try and contain China or try and, ensure that China is given a taste of its own medicine, especially in the Indo-Pacific?
There is no doubt we saw during election campaigns that China had emerged as a major issue. And post-pandemic, China has already announced being the only country to achieve 2.3% of positive growth, hitting a GDP now at 15.5 trillion US dollars. So China as a competitor in trade and technology, and of course also as a strategic challenge to United States continues, which also means that India will be a very close partner of United States in how to engage with China. For example, foundations that are already laid during last 4 years. And there is no secret about the fact that we were able to invoke LEMOA, Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement, in having an urgent purchase of those special high altitude winter clothing, which is required for Indian forces in Ladakh in minus 30 degree. And of course, there are reports also of United States sharing intelligence. And we had recently signed in October that agreement on sharing geospatial data, both nautical and aeronautical and ground maps, to give you coordinates of enemy positions. So reports are that US has been helping India even on that. So some of the things that have already been put on place will continue. But of course, as we have heard President Biden repeatedly underlining two things. One, he wants to push value-based foreign policy. Second, have a close cooperation with allies and partners and thereby reclaim the United States global leadership. And very often, United States is a unique case where domestic is as much international as domestic it is. So even when the initial focus will be on domestic pandemic, 400,000 lives lost in United States. So what we may see is maybe not as stronger focus on defense and security cooperation with India, but expanding health security. For example, India provides largest workforce for health sector and also, of course, medicines. So in that sense, we might see cooperation broad basing itself into health security, stronger, robust people-to-people cooperation. 1% of United States domestic population are people of Indian origin. So Indian origin people are also very influential. And then, of course, we have spoken endlessly about Kamala Harris being an important connect with India. So I think there is going to be an enormous focus in broad basing India relationship, in people-to-people, economic and trade relationship, health security, and continuing with that strong global, strategic partnership, comprehensive global strategic partnership, which has been built over the last 4 years. So India will continue to be an important player as far as the United States reclaiming global leadership using value-based foreign policy is concerned. And therefore, I think that there is going to be incremental, may not be major redesigning, but incremental reshaping of the relationship. And I think India will continue to be a very important player in how Joe Biden reclaims global leadership.
Absolutely. All right. And since we are here, Yashwant Raj, let's also talk about the new areas of convergence and how the pandemic really could ensure that India and the United States collaborate, further to try and ensure that we put an end to the pandemic. After all, we are the pharmacy of the world. Also, can we expect further convergence as far as the economy is concerned? Because let's not forget that the entire globe is going through a tough time with regards to the economy. So could these also be areas of further convergence?
Oh, there is already cooperation on fighting the epidemic, and they've been in touch. The two governments have been in touch, and as you know, as you rightly said, India is emerging as a major supplier of COVID vaccines. Yes, only yesterday I think a major shipment was sent to Morocco, and that's an emerging area. I mean, there is no area where India and the US are not cooperating or working together. And and pharmaceuticals is one of them. I mean, India is where a lot of American medicines are manufactured, especially the generic medicines, and so that is an ongoing cooperation. And on economy, that's again it's a evolving story, and now bilateral trade is worth $150 billion, I think 160, and it could be more. But we will eventually have to talk about the trade. The trade tensions. I mean, trade tensions have been hanging over the relationship for a long time. And during President Trump's time, there was an urgency to tackle the issue, and but nothing happened eventually because I believe the Americans kept changing the goalposts because they kept asking for more and more, and they more demands were put on the table. So that eventually didn't happen. So at some stage, the Biden administration will have to look at a trade agreement of some sort, an interim small trade agreement with the promise of a larger agreement at some stage. But that will be key to the economic relationship between the two countries. And we haven't heard much from the Biden administration on trade dispute tensions yet. But I think we will have to wait for the USTR, the new USTR, US Trade Representatives. When she goes before the Senate for her confirmation hearing, we expect to hear something from her on trade talks with India. So,
Right.
and that is going to be a critical point.
Absolutely. So, since we're talking about convergence, let's also talk about divergence, Ambassador. And where do you believe some of the sticky issues lie and the issues that need special attention under the Biden presidency?
Trade is the foremost issue, and the Americans have been talking about protectionism in India. They have their concerns. We have our concerns. And this has already been discussed. I won't go into that. But human rights. Now, the CAA, human rights, the Americans are likely to say something. They said things in their election manifestos. There were statements both by there were something in both by the president and the vice president. So therefore, there will be some irritation out there. But as I mentioned, it will still be dealt with in a mature way, because we also have some cause. There are also issues in the United States that might be causing concern in the rest of the world with regard to racism, for example, and with regard to what happened before the inauguration, the weeks before that, the subversion of democracy and the verdict. So therefore, it's not as if the US is absolutely lily white in this issue. So we do have certain issues that we could raise, at least at the tactical level, if that comes up. But I don't think it's going to cast a major shadow, a minor shadow, yes, but not a major shadow on the relationship that must go forward. And then as regards vaccine diplomacy, now I'm just revisiting that and diverting a little bit. The vaccine diplomacy, this is not a problem, a stumbling block, which is the question you asked, but this is a solution in a broader sense, in a strategic sense. Look, the Indian vaccines have found much greater acceptance so far in certainly the Indo-Pacific region, in the Asia-Pacific and perhaps beyond, than the Chinese vaccine. For example, in our neighborhood, Nepal, for example, had made an informed choice on going for the Indian vaccine rather than the Chinese. This sort of strengthening of India's hand in the so-called vaccine diplomacy and the V5 really helps the relationship with the US, because it gives us another point of convergence. As was discussed, we are not going to talk about hard strategic issues yet, because the US is now immersed in its own problems after the pandemic. So therefore, this creates another issue on which we will be able to build a broad coalition of the willing to deal with the rise of China in terms of soft power. Now, sorry for the diversion, but other problems, I don't see really any problems apart from human rights and trade. And as I said, is going to go forward. The trajectory is very optimistic.
Right.
And everything will depend on India's own internal trajectory, both political, economic, and in terms of social cohesion also.
Absolutely. Professor, let me bring in another aspect here, and let's talk about, something that does not directly involve us, but clearly, what Biden has in store for Iran, the JCPOA, as well as Afghanistan, will have bearings for India.
There is no doubt. He's mentioned it very clearly. He wants to re-engage with the JCPOA. He also wants to continue in addressing problems in Afghanistan. Basically, he is the first leader in the United States, if you notice, who's used expressions even domestically as domestic terrorists or supremacists, white supremacists. He's used these words. So he's fully conscious of these low-intensity challenges of terrorism. And therefore, Afghanistan exit may be a little delayed. I think exit may not be as prompt as the last president, Donald Trump, was anticipating. And therefore, I think the focus will come on Pakistan and India. And I think Pakistan would be another factor to ensure that India continuously stays an important ally of United States, because President Biden has been very conscious about Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Islamic State, all other Al-Qaeda. He's been conscious of these threats to United States, and therefore I think that will be another convergence of India and United States. But when it comes to re-engaging with Iran, that will again be very beneficial for India, because India had been under enormous pressure during Trump presidency to completely disengage with Iran, and sort of absolutely have no relationship, stop supplies, importing of oil, which India ultimately ended up doing. So I think it might gradually open up a sort of a little more space for India to maneuver that and rebuild that strategic partnership that India has had with Iran. And that goes with the larger vision that President Biden is saying, that he wants to take both institutions, structures, and arrangements that have been built, and using those structures, allies and alliances and mechanisms, is how he wants to reclaim that relationship. In which case, obviously, JCPOA remains a very significant achievement in stabilizing the entire West Asia, where Iran has been a major concern for United States. And of course, therefore, it will see a certain amount of re-engagement. But it's going to be, as I mentioned, incremental, imperceptible, through allies and through norms and institutions. And that is where the convergence with India is going to be fantastic. Just 30 seconds on Indo-Pacific, for example, another area where we will see enormous engagement happening between two states. For a long time, there were experts saying Joe Biden is not using Indo-Pacific, he's talking about Asia-Pacific. Now he's appointed Kurt Kimball, for example, who's been a very important voice on Indo-Pacific. And he's been talking about adding G7 to the 4 nations of Quad and expanding Quad. And we are also talking of Quad Plus. So that brings the vision of Quad and Indo-Pacific much closer to India's inclusive approach. And therefore, India would be much comfortable in engaging Indo-Pacific in general and United States in Indo-Pacific in specific terms. And therefore, again, both Pakistan and China will continue to be important drivers. But there is a lot more autonomous and independent component that really makes India and United States work together. And that will see even Joe Biden presidency continuing in that same fashion.
Absolutely. All right, time to get quick closing comments from my panelists now with the best way forward for Indo-US relations, starting first with you, Yashwant.
Thanks, Frank. As I think we discussed during an earlier panel meet like this, we should give them time. India should give them time to settle in, find their groove, and then as the professor was mentioning, there was some disquiet in India about the Biden campaign's use of the phrase Asia Pacific instead of Indo Pacific. Much was made by analysts, and I've heard Biden administration officials use the phrase interchangeably. And as the professor was mentioning, Kurt Campbell, his official designation, I think, is Indo-Pacific, something or the other, and he's been called the czar for Indo-Pacific, the Indo-Pacific czar. So we should give them time. India should give them time to settle down, and before jumping at little hints of trouble or offshoots of good things to happen. So. But overall, as everyone agreed on the panel, there is bipartisan support for India in the U.S. in Congress, in the administration. So things can't really go very bad. And so,
right.
I think I would end it there.
Sure, Ambassador.
Well, things can't go bad. That's true. But there will be some issues on which we have to be ready for some contention between the two countries. CATSA, for example. The CATSA, there have been hints from the United States that the waiver will not apply to India. So this is in the immediate context of the S-400 missile deal with the Russians. And the Russian Federation has very clearly said, the foreign minister, Lavrov, said very clearly, and that was quite a blunt statement, that the US is playing games and hurting relations between India and Russia. So we will have to manage this very carefully, because Russia is a reliable partner that is willing to give us technologies, not just platforms, but technologies. And they have done it. The United States, no. the United States have not given us critical defense technologies, not yet. We have the 4 completed foundational agreements. We hope this will lead to that, and we can get help in defense manufacturing, but it's not yet a done deal. And
Right.
then Pakistan. In the context of, we heard the defense secretary at the hearing in Congress, in the Senate. He said that Pakistan is critical on solving the problems in Afghanistan. So if it's critical, is it going back to the same problem of the past where, you may be nasty, but we need you. And
Sure.
therefore, you are very important for us. And where does India come into that? So this will be balanced, I hope, by whether you call it the Asia Pacific or the Indo Pacific or the Quad plus G7, fine, whatever you may call it. But ultimately, it depends on India's ability to strengthen itself and restore its GDP growth. That only will give us the credibility and heft to deal with the United States on a relatively equal footing and have greater credibility in dealing jointly and individually with China.
Absolutely. And Professor, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
I agree with the ambassador. There are going to be, several difficulties in the relationship. No relations are without challenges and irritants. But what is unusual and positive here, I think, is we have President Joe Biden, who is very familiar with India's political elite, India's way of functioning. He's visited India several times. He was vice president to President Obama, who made history by visiting India twice as president of the United States. So you would remember for 2 decades, there were absolutely no presidential visits to India. So I think there is a sort of some hope. Vice President Kamala Harris is an important connect for India. Indian diaspora is becoming increasingly visible and influential in the United States. 20 members of Indian origin in Joe Biden's team, for example, to the minimum, they bring certain comfort and confidence in building the relationship for Indian interlocutors with the United States. But what we will see is end of showdowns and Twitters. That's not going to happen anymore. We will see a very incremental, imperceptible way of dealing with the difficult issues in closed-door meetings. And those, I think, gradual incremental approaches will see India-United States relations broad-basing itself now into expanding economic relationship. There is enormous potential. We've been speaking for a long time to take bilateral trade to $500 billion. So broad-basing, people-to-people connection, health security, several other sectors will see gradual incremental partnerships building now under President Joe Biden. And I think that is a way forward that I see is going to be very hopeful in bilateral relations.
Okay. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective. For us, what's coming out of this discussion is that it's still early days, really, to firmly say what shape the India-US ties will take under the Joe Biden presidency. But India enjoys bipartisan support in the United States, which is a big positive. What we can expect is a continuation of the strategic partnership, and we will continue to build on the strong fundamentals between Washington, D.C. and New Delhi. As far as some of the sticky issues are concerned, trade will continue to be a major concern, really, and we might not see some kind of a trade deal take its fruition anytime in the near future. That is something that we have to closely work together with and come out with some kind of a solution. As far as human rights is concerned, it could be a minor irritant, but incidents that led up to the inauguration of Joe Biden have shown us that probably the United States is far worse off than us. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.